Help support AMTV by becoming a patron, an AMTV staff member, and following us over on Twitter.
But we've got to turn to some breaking news now this morning because ITV is in discussions with Sky, the owner of Sky News, about selling the media and entertainment arm of its business.
Hi there guys, it's Adam Martyn here and welcome back to another video. Quite a big topic to talk about today, one that could potentially, if it all goes through, change the entire landscape of British television as we know it. I'm sure you've seen the headline about this already. I know some of you have already asked me to talk about it in comments and on social media, and believe me, we're going to get right down to it today. And that is in principle that ITV are in talks to sell their television business to Sky. Yes, that's right, ITV, the oldest commercial broadcaster that we have here in the UK, that once upon a time had the, ITV network with all the regional companies and structure, and still operates and is still a big name in UK television today, is potentially selling their whole TV business to one of their competitors, one of their oldest competitors in Sky. Why is this happening? What's going on? What does this mean for various things? We're going to get into all of that today. Before we jump into it, remember to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel as well. That would really help us out. So this article first, we're going to jump across a few today. The first one is from BBC News, and it says that ITV has said it's in the preliminary discussions to sell its broadcasting business to Sky for £1.6 billion, a move that could reshape the UK's television landscape. The talks focus on ITV's media and entertainment division, which includes its free-to-air TV channels, as well as the ITVX streaming service. So you're talking ITV's 1, 2, 3, 4, Quiz, and indeed ITVX, the streamer, which is something they've been building up for quite a while. And again, £1.6 billion, not chump change. The discussions with Sky, which is owned by US-based Comcast, come as the television industry faces fierce competition from streaming services such as Netflix and Disney+. The deal would not include ITV's production arm, ITV Studios, which make popular programs such as Love Island and I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. So this is the really interesting distinction, how when it says television business, it means like its operations, I suppose. The channels, the ITVX streaming service, but the production arm, ITV Studios, the studios behind a lot of those big popular programs that it mentions, wouldn't be included in this deal. Now, why would that be the case? I mean, on the surface of it, it means they could continue to produce these programs. Maybe not necessarily for ITV branded channels if they stay that way. We're going to delve more into that as we go, but let's continue. However, one analyst said that the broadcaster could lose those shows if the deal does go through, as the channel would have to bid alongside rival companies for the contracts, despite ITV being the biggest customer at present. That's right, there could be other companies that then vie in should this deal go through, and then losing those shows, your I'm a Celebs, your Love Islands, thing that drag in a lot of viewership and ultimately a lot of revenue, could no longer be under ITV Studios' arm or under their brand. Tom Harrington from Ender's Analysis said it would be unlikely for current shows to leave ITV, as there will already be agreements in place, but splitting the two businesses could make it less likely for new shows to appear on ITV. Now, Comcast, which owns Universal Studios, bought Rupert Murdoch's Sky in 2018 and is a major player in the US media sector. Yes, Comcast has been a name I've heard of before, and again, it's quite dominating over there, so it seems like maybe ultimately, even though Sky's the one buying it, Comcast own them, they're making roads into the UK as well. Just to give you an example of its dominance, it owns NBC Universal, which contains the NBC and CNBC channels, DreamWorks Animation, and streaming service Peacock. Media analyst Ian Whittaker told the BBC Today programme that a combination of Sky and ITV would mean that they have 70% plus of the UK TV advertising market, which he said in normal circumstances would be rejected by regulators because of the dominance it would give them. But he added that with rising competition from the streaming services raising questions over the future of TV, a takeover could be seen as almost a rescue deal. Now, let's just break that down. Like it says, 70% plus of the TV advertising market, of any market, that would definitely constitute, we're encroaching or even passing into a monopoly there, which, as quite rightly pointed out, would normally be turned down. However, maybe some would argue, is it time to rewrite the rule books, particularly on TV, as to what constitutes a monopoly? Is it just your traditional TV channels, or are we including streamers into that? Because I guess if you throw the streamers in, then that 70% plus isn't quite there. Not too sure on that one, but it seems a point of contention. Mr. Harrington said ITV Studios itself was a very desirable operation that was unencumbered by a legacy TV business. So ITV Studios implies it stands on its own without the TV side behind it. Sir Peter Bazalgette, who was a TV executive and producer and was chair of ITV until September 2022 and is a shareholder in the company, told the Today programme that the deal made sense given the pressure from streamers. Now, on the question of whether a Sky or ITV link-up would run against competition issues, Sir Peter said the regulator needed to redefine what the advertising market is. There you go. So I'm not the only one who thinks it, clearly. I guess, if you've got the former chair of ITV saying that, hey, this deal kind of makes sense with the way things are going, that's a pretty strong indicator that the industry at large might be for it, at least in terms of those higher-ups, people who ultimately make these calls. He said Google owner, Alphabet, and Facebook owner, Meta, should be treated as the rivals, not the traditional TV advertising market. Regarding ITV's TV channels, he said free-to-air channels across the world are not seen to have a great amount of value, adding there's going to be an inevitable consolidation of domestic broadcasters all across Europe. And again, this is something that's been talked about before, that this could definitely happen. And yeah, I mean, sadly, free-to-air channels in a business sense are seen to not have too much value. They have a lot of value, I think, amongst us, amongst the viewers of said channels. But yeah, there is going to be that consolidation going forward, I think, which would be really worrying in the long term. Mr. Whitaker said that streaming was where the growth was for broadcasters, even though with established streamers, the penetration rates have started to level off in the past couple of years in the UK. He added the competition was now also coming from YouTube TV, which showed live events such as sports and news. And a recent report from Ofcom, the media regulator, found that YouTube has become the UK's second most watched media service, behind only the BBC. And again, a lot of those things are true. The penetration rates, as they call them, in terms of streamers, it is starting to level off. You had that initial boom in sort of the mid to late 2010s, even into the 2020s, with it being the pandemic and a lot of people being stuck inside. But now things are starting to level off, and particularly as belts tighten, with money being a key issue, the amount of streamers that people can splash out on is decreasing as well. Big live sporting events traditionally shown on television may also increasingly move to streamers, as sporting giants such as UEFA seek to cash in on the huge streaming market. And again, a lot of these streamers have bigger pockets than a lot of the TV companies, Netflix, Disney, all of them. So yeah, these big events, you might enjoy it, on these free-to-air channels, these public service broadcasters for now, not necessarily going to be like that in the future. ITV Studios, which makes programmes for several platforms, including the BBC, Netflix and Amazon, has reportedly been the subject of takeover talks in the past. It did make Alan Bates vs. The Post Office, which was one of the biggest dramas of the last few years, and popular anime series One Piece on Netflix, which, as I'm sure you know, is a huge show. And when it comes to more analysts, we've got one from AJ Bell, who said it's a surprise there was an interest in ITV's TV channels, describing it as a ball and chain compared with ITV Studios, which he called the jewel in ITV's crown. Sky's interest was Christmas come early for management and shareholders, he added, saying ITV Studios could be an instant takeover target itself as content-hungry streamers seek a hub to generate more programs to feed their platforms. So interesting there, this analyst suggesting that why is Sky almost going for the TV operations when the real jewel, the real prize, would be ITV Studios, the production house, the ones making the content. And I think there is still some worth in the TV operations, but I can also understand the idea that the production house is more valuable. But then again, once they acquire the TV operations, like Bell says here, would then ITV Studios become an instant target for a takeover in itself? If Sky gets that, then the programs that it makes, will that only be available on Sky channels or Sky services? Again, these are all things that need to be considered before any sort of deal goes through. On Thursday, ITV forecast that its advertising revenue would be 9% lower in the last 3 months of 2025, saying that advertisers were being cautious ahead of expected tax rises in the budget. The broadcaster also said it would carry out a further $35 million in cost savings, which would lead to some programs being delayed until next year. So there's already a negative trend going on in the TV operations of ITV, partly because of cautious advertisers. And again, the last 3 months, normally that would be like a boom time for advertisers, post-Halloween leading up to Christmas, where they're really wanting to sell stuff. If they're being cautious now and revenue is going to be almost 10% lower in this crucial period, then yeah, to me, that doesn't make the TV operations from a business standpoint sound that attractive. Do you know what I mean? Because surely it then becomes more of a liability. I mean, again, there are so many things to consider about this. It definitely means the end of like the ITV we would all know. But then again, we don't know that, because hypothetically, let's do a hypothetical for a second. Say the deal goes through. Sky acquires the TV operations of ITV. How are they going to do it? Are they going to keep the ITV branding? You know, that brand familiarity that audiences have had 70 years now to build up? Or do they just completely rebrand it in the Sky image, which is equally and respectfully a brand that a lot of people know? I'd say, you know, if you were saying which is more well-known, ITV or Sky, I think that's hard to quantify. ITV's been around for longer, yes, about 30 years longer, but Sky is equally very popular and has a large install base. So would it be more beneficial for them to rebrand ITV channels as Sky channels or leave them as they are? That's one question that would need answering. If it was up to me, I'd maintain the ITV branding, but again, I'm not a businessman, and businessmen think very differently to you and me. There's more potential impacts as well. Think about regional stuff. You know, one part of ITV in the golden era, as people call it, was its regional structure, how people all across the country were catered for no matter where they lived. Will Sky maintain that? I don't think they will. I think they just go to like a rolling news service that covers all of the country, but that sort of regional focus, you know, for people to get the regional news, I think that will be ultimately lost on if the deal goes through, and those ITV channels will lose that regional structure, which will really be the final nail in the coffin of the structure that was set up all the way back in 1955. Now, to follow up the BBC article, we've got some from RXTV. As always, go and check them out as well. So regarding it, in terms of the certainty, ITV told investors that there can be no certainty as to the terms upon which any potential sale may be agreed or whether any transaction will take place. ITV says it's going to offer a further announcement in due course if appropriate. So it's being more coy there. We're acknowledging that these talks are happening, that, you know, the potential acquisition for 1.6 billion is out there, but ITV is telling the investors themselves that they can't confirm that this is definitely going to happen. I imagine a lot of things need to be worked out with Sky and ultimately Comcast as well before this actually goes through. Analysts suggest the acquisition could lead to greater investment in UK programming. However, it's likely to also raise questions about the editorial independence and the future of public service broadcasting. Public service broadcasting as a whole has been under threat for a while now and continues to be. And yeah, I mean, if we lose ITV to Sky, then I think that will be a huge blow for the public service broadcaster scene. It says through ITV, Comcast would also gain a shareholding in a rival to Sky. ITV has a shareholding in Everyone TV, the organisation responsible for the management and promotion of free-to-air TV platforms, including Freeview and Freely. And Comcast would also gain ITV's 40% stake of ITN. So do you see, it's not just merely ITV that will be sort of in the firing line here. There are multiple things that Comcast will get a stake in. A stake in ITV, therefore a stake in Everyone TV, therefore a stake in Freeview and Freely, the main free-to-air platforms. Not a controlling stake, it seems, by any means, but a stake nonetheless. Again, getting more of their fingers into the UK television scene, creeping in just as they did in the US, and then they ultimately established a dominant presence there. But there's even more from RXTV. They say from ITN to Freeview, the Comcast ITV takeover could trigger major changes, and we're going to go over some of them right now. In terms of different consequences, let's look at free-to-air TV first. So it says ITV currently holds that stake in Everyone TV, which oversees Freeview, Freesat, and Freely, which are key platforms that are rivaling Comcast's owned Sky's satellite and streaming services. So they'd sort of be no longer in competition, they'd have fingers in the pie of the competition. If that takeover proceeds without regulatory safeguards, Comcast would gain influence over the very platforms competing with its own pay TV offerings. These regulators will intervene in some sense, because if Comcast, I think news is so important, and to deliver reliable news, trustworthy news, unbiased news as much as possible, I think is so important to just the modern day, particularly with the rise of social media, with the rise of fake news and misinformation from all corners. I think having that reliable news is something that needs to be maintained. But if Comcast gains that influence, particularly on commercial TV news, the ITN stake already with Sky, what they have, that could be potentially dangerous in the long run. As part of the deal to buy Sky in 2018, Comcast promised to protect the editorial independence of Sky News and continue funding it for a decade after acquiring the UK-based satellite broadcaster. But beyond that point, Comcast is no longer required to cover the cost of the loss-making business. So Sky News loses money. That's what it's implying there. And Comcast is obligated to it until 2028. But after that, it doesn't have to cover the cost. If this deal goes through, if it takes on the ITN news for ITV channels for independent television, if I guess maybe, I'm just shooting out here, maybe as like a consolidation tactic, they'll look at which service loses them the most money and then maybe consolidate it all into one. It's hard to say. But again, I think running two separate news services, if the minute that obligation runs out in 2028 for Sky, if that's the one that loses the most money, maybe they'll bin that and just focus on the news that ITN provide. As a result, under Comcast ownership, it may seek to cut Sky News' losses by integrating it into ITV News, see what I mean, as soon as the existing contracts allow. 20 years after the end of the ITV News channel, God remember that, ITV may once again have a rolling news service that incorporates their news output. Yes, ITV do not have a rolling news channel, not in the traditional sense, so maybe that will come back if everything gets amalgamated. But of course, regulators will want to examine any proposals that arise from the deal, particularly because of any impact on ITN, which also produces the news for Channel 4 and 5. Now, what about sport then? So in recent years, Sky has partnered with Channel 4 to broaden access to major sporting events for UK viewers. Back in 2023, Channel 4 signed a deal to screen free-to-air F1 in partnership with Sky, which is big business's F1. However, if a proposed ITV-Comcast merger goes ahead, ITV1 may once again gain the F1 coverage. But I think the main thing, it doesn't matter really who's broadcasting it. I think as long as these major sports have a free-to-air option, at least with highlights or whatever it is, then that needs to be the key thing. Under such a deal, ITV Sports' operations would likely be integrated with Sky Sports, giving Comcast greater leverage in bidding for the so-called crown jewel events, those designated to air at least partially on free-to-air TV. So currently, ITV and the BBC, they share rights to some of the marquee events like the FIFA Men's World Cup, but Comcast could pursue exclusive rights in the future, potentially sidelining the Beeb, and that would be a major blow to the BBC, absolutely. I mean, when it comes to those major sporting events, I have not spoken to a single person in my life who say they enjoy it more when it's on ITV because of the adverts, naturally. The BBC can carry coverage without ads, constant coverage, but if they lose that, then that could be awful. Conversely, Comcast may be reluctant to allow ITV4 to carry expensive free-to-air sports content. Instead, it may choose to strengthen Sky Sports' subscription offerings. While regulators might not object, the shift could frustrate fans and raise concerns among sports right holders who value the reach of free-to-air exposure. I mean, this is the thing. Sky will probably look at it, as it says, from a business standpoint. Their Sky Sports package, anything that's free-to-air, for example, like a lot of the stuff on ITV4, that might just get rolled into Sky Sports and you will have to pay a subscription for it. What it means that the rights holders, even though it might not be the most lucrative financially, the reach you get on free-to-air is enormous. The potential millions that could watch these events and, tune in and then engage on a wider level beyond that. It's massive. That hasn't changed because, it seems obvious, doesn't it? Free-to-air, it's the most accessible way. If you can watch something without having to pay an upfront subscription for it, then, you're going to go with that option. So that could really shake up the sports scene on UK TV, at least on, free-to-air TV as we know it. Regarding soaps and other shows, so from long-running soaps like Corrie to glossy Saturday night entertainment, ITV Studios is the creative force behind many of ITV's most popular programmes. However, under a potential Comcast acquisition, ITV Studios could be separated from the broadcaster's linear channels and streaming platform, the very outlets that have traditionally showcased its content. While the structural shift wouldn't be unprecedented, ITV Studios already produces shows for rival broadcasters. It could pose challenges. ITV's broadcast schedule remains heavily dependent on in-house productions. Over time, Comcast may opt to commission more programming from its own UK production arm, Sky Studios potentially reshaping ITV's content pipeline. Yes, and if it's not quite clear, so ITV Studios at the minute make a lot of content that naturally airs on ITV. It's like an in-house production. It makes content for those channels. But because it's ITV Studios isn't going to be included in this deal of Sky potentially buying Comcast, that shakes things up. ITV Studios will still make the programs they make, but depending on how things change, it might not necessarily end up on the broadcaster it was originally made for. Even if Sky keep the same branding of, ITV on the channels, depending on like competition, who bids for more, etc., you might have shows like Corrie. It sounds balmy to say, but it might not end up being on an ITV channel anymore, which is crazy. And like it says, ITV Studios may lose more work or might not have a home for these particular shows. Depending on if Comcast do employ Sky Studios and more content comes from them, then the schedule's going to look completely different to what we're used to on ITV. But what about the new kid on the block? So Quiz, ITV Quiz is obviously quite a new channel. It launched earlier in the summer, but even that faces uncertainty. It's a direct competitor of Sky's established Challenge channel, raising the likelihood of consolidation. It's the least likely factor to concern regulators, but it could make ITV Quiz a rather short-lived service. Well, yeah, we've said that from the beginning, haven't we, when ITV Quiz launched? How is it going to compete with Challenge? And Challenge has been around for a long time. It has a really loyal following. It had a good range of programs as well from the archive to bolster. I think should Sky take control, then yeah, they'll probably just fold ITV Quiz into Challenge, because even though ITV, you could argue, is a very well established name in the TV scene, in terms of like these individual channels, Challenge has been around for decades. ITV Quiz has barely been around 6 months. It's a no-brainer as to which one you keep in terms of the name. Without getting into too much of the jargon, there is also the Freeview Multiplex business, SDN, how Comcast could gain a foothold in that, which also basically provides services for a bunch of other channels like Channel 5, UKTV, QVC. Like we've said before, getting these fingers into different pies of the UK broadcasting scene, particularly into multiplexes that cater to a lot of channels for a lot of people, carrying signals, for example, on one of them for ITV, of course, Channel 4-5, S4C in Wales. I think this is an area that the regulators are going to have to look at really in depth. Getting a stake in the Freeview multiplex business, I think that's going to have to be really, really scrutinised. Then, of course, there is streaming. Just 3 years after launching, ITVX's future also remains uncertain. Would Sky seek to merge it with its streaming offer? Could more of ITV streaming content go behind a paywall? As ITV Studios would be split off from ITV's broadcasting business, some shows synonymous with ITV could end up being licensed by ITV Studios to appear on other streaming platforms. This is what I mean. Could you imagine Coronation Street on, I don't know, BBC iPlayer? That would have been unthinkable. It has been unthinkable for 60 plus years, but this could well happen. And to be honest, merging it with its own streaming offer, I think that's the more attractive. Why on earth would they want to run two different streaming services, one of them not necessarily behind a paywall? Well, they could do, because then, ITVX remains sort of free on a base level, yes, with adverts, but it remains free for people to access a boatload of content. But like it suggests, a lot of the higher end programs, or like the most popular programs, they could be shoved behind a paywall. And given Sky's business practices in the past, I wouldn't be surprised. And lastly, we have Sky Mix, which is Sky's main free-to-air entertainment channel, providing an outlet for Sky to show some of its shows to a wider audience on Freeview and FreeSat. But it's likely to become surplus to requirements if Comcast gains control of ITV, which, yeah, it would be, because you've got the whole slew of ITV channels there. Why would you need another one? Again, more consolidation. ITV has said it's going to provide further announcements in due course should talks lead to a deal, but it's clear regulators are also going to want to look at the implications. So at the end of all of this mountain of information and potential differences. When is this deal likely to happen? Just to put a prediction on it, I don't think it's going to happen immediately. Maybe over the next few years, but as mentioned by various articles at this point, the regulators are going to want to scrutinise this to high heaven, and rightly so, because this would be such a huge shift for the UK scene. You have ITV, again, the oldest commercial broadcaster in the UK, and probably the most well-known, being potentially taken over by Sky, an equally well-known broadcaster. But it's not just the names that could potentially change, it's the whole makeup of programming. If Sky fill it with stuff from their own in-house studios, then, goodbye Corrie and Emmerdale and I'm a Celeb, and enter whatever Sky Studios make and put on the main channels. Keeping some of the ITV operations as free-to-air is a no-brainer. Free-to-air does have that reach. It might not be as lucrative from that financial perspective, but I think even if they just kept one channel as free to air. Again, all this consolidation, everything will probably be folded into each other. Some of it shoved behind a paywall and only accessible via a subscription. Like it mentioned with the sport aspect, I can easily see that happening. As to or not whether this takeover is good or bad, it's really hard to say at this point. I can understand why people like Peter Bazalgette, the former ITV chair, saying that it's a good move for ITV, particularly with the TV scene at the moment and the way things are going. I mean, we've talked ad nauseum on this channel about the dire straits that traditional television here in the UK is under, and it doesn't seem like that's going to brighten up anytime soon. So I can understand on one side why it might be good, but reading into it, there's a lot that could potentially change that would be for the negative. And again, I just want to highlight the potential loss of the ITV regional focus. Losing that would lose the core of what ITV was when it was set up back in the 1950s. Not that Sky or anyone at Comcast would really care about that, but I know it means a lot to a lot of viewers, not just older viewers who remember the glory days of the ITV network, but I see comments all the time from people my age or even younger who say getting regional news and stories relating to them and where they live is just as important now as it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. So I think that would be one potential big loss. As to whether or not it's good or bad, I think on paper, if you're saying how it's going to benefit like television in the long run, then that sounds like a good thing. But like I said, there have been many points that I've read out throughout this video that raise an eyebrow, need the proper scrutiny, need the proper attention. And should this deal go through, then the proof will be in the pudding as to what will change. Is this the end of ITV as a whole? I'd like to think not. I would hope that Sky and ultimately Comcast would recognise the brand recognition and the worth of ITV that it has built up over the past 7 decades, and they're not just going to do away with that. I think there's a balance they can do between their operations of Sky and ITV as well. I think there's going to be a hell of a lot of consolidation. I've said it a few times, but I mean, based on what we've read there, why wouldn't they? If money's being lost from a business standpoint, either closing down some operations, folding channels into another, amalgamating content, it just makes sense from that business standpoint. A lot of potential change that could happen. But I want to know your thoughts. What do you think about this potential deal, this potential acquisition? Once again, ITV in talks as to sell their television business to Sky for £1.6 billion. That's a lot of money. Let me know your thoughts about it in the comments below. Do you think this is going to go ahead, or do you think this is going to get stuck in limbo for a long time? What do you think needs to change? Let me know all of that in the comments down below. But if you enjoyed this video, leave a like on it, and again, subscribe to the channel as well. It would really mean the world. In the meantime, I've been Adam Martyn from AMTV. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.
All of the public service broadcasters, including the BBC and Channel 4, are up against it. Last year, YouTube overtook ITV's share of viewing in the UK for the first time. If Sky and ITV merged, their combined share of viewing would almost match the BBC's. The new business would account for £3 billion of advertising revenue. That's the lion's share of all advertising on British television.
Thank you to our patrons for helping to support the show, and a special thank you to Macra, Sean Knock, Dord Khan, Ethan Carberry-Holt, Liam Domain, AJ Mac 200017, Jen, Traffy, Mr. Eurovision 1986, Evan Hart 42 Radio, Tim Ripley, 40-something Manchild, Mr. J McLeod, James Wallace, Ben, Stephen Oliver, Shadow Fiend 180X, Swan Ronson, Adam Gamer, Sir Fonzie Daz, Matthew Elif, Pigeon's House, Seraphic Euphoria, Dave Batten, Kevin Mallon, Shah H, Liam Turner, Real Team Foxy Plays, Jenny T, Lovely Dave and Gem, Tyler McLean 316, NJ on DT84, Jimmy the Bantam, and the Macabre Tavern are AMTV staff members.